We want to start with some educational matters, as it were, here in the United States. Obviously, many things that we could talk about as it concerns education. There are some interesting things happening in California vis-a-vis the issue of how certain subjects are being taught. Maybe I'll put it that way, but also I think some broader issues flowing from that about the overall appreciation we have for teachers as a capitalist society, or maybe lack thereof, and what that means about this type of society. So we are very, very honored to be joined as we continue the show by Frank Lara, who is a longtime educator, community organizer, and the current executive vice president of one of my favorite unions, the United Educators of San Francisco. Frank, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for your kind words, Eugene, and also for covering this important topic.
Absolutely. And appreciate you making time. I know y'all are very busy there, a lot going on. I wanted to start with AB 715, which is a California bill, assembly bill. That's what AB stands for those who aren't in California, that was just signed by the governor. And this has been a major topic of discussion amongst educators, amongst parents, amongst others, because it is deemed to be something that is noble, which is fighting anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination. But many are criticizing the bill, Frank, for not actually being about what it says it's about, and in fact being more of a censorship style of bill, especially concerning how the issues regarding the Palestinian cause are being taught. So give us a sense from a UESF perspective of if AB 715 is what it says it is, or if it's maybe a little bit of a Trojan horse.
Yeah, and I thank you for covering this subject, because particularly as you know, a nationwide audience usually hears about California. We hear, right, that the current governor Gavin Newsom is at the forefront, really fighting against Trump. His right wing is, you know, even in the highlight of his petty attacks on Twitter. But you would assume that if that was true, then there would the actual proposals, oppositions, the alternatives that were being proposed were something progressive or something that actually supported freedom of speech. Just last week on the LA Times, he was quoted as saying, anybody who took sort of this Trump oath to go after pro-Palestine speech or implement DEI, diversity inclusion programs, that the state would no longer prioritize them or not give them the university's funding. But what we're seeing with the signing of AB 715 is really a culmination of an attack against ethnic studies, this work that originated from San Francisco, originated in California, that was emerging from the liberation movements, the progressive movements, the civil rights era, that demanding equal representation in public institutions, in civil society, that now we were starting to study our own history as California, as the rest of the nation was shifting, and our public schools, the demographics were shifting as suddenly schools were opening up post-segregation, forced segregation, that we needed our stories. In my particular, I relate to it. We needed our stories told in the textbooks, in the official narratives. So ethnic studies has been attacked multiple times, but it was actually moving forward. And we had even a section of it called Liberated Ethnic Studies that had made it all the way to the state level. But with what's going on with the genocide in Palestine against the Palestinian people, this constant pushback of the people to have truth against what's the atrocities by the state of Israel, as we started seeing with the student uprising in Stanford and UCLA, USC, what we started seeing in Berkeley, as the student movement, student voices were fighting courageously, and we started that repression happening, we started seeing a move by some of these, we would say, extreme, not really tied to education, self-interested groups promoting interest of a foreign government, using the issue of anti-Semitism, which is also something that the right wing has been saying as well, right? So using that issue to then quell any dissent against the occupation of the Palestinian people, of their land, any of the telling of truth, because, and it's tied to ethnic studies, because once you start making the connection of how the U.S. committed genocide against the native people, stole their land, occupied their land, and how that affects today, then, you know, you're also making the clear connection for the next generation, which is what critical thinking does, to the fact that Palestine was occupied, to the way their land was stolen, to the way they're being attacked and brutalized. So I think it's a culmination, and there was an opinion piece in the New York Times which did a great job of equating sort of the right-wing attack on academic freedom, that the version of AB 17 actually represented the Democrats' equal attempt to quell free speech.
Yeah. No, I think that's critically important. And I think that the point you make here is a little redundant here about the sort of critical thinking aspect of this is super important. And academic freedom is also super important. And I think it's interesting because when we think about academic freedom, we almost solely discuss higher education. And people don't think about K through 12 education. It's almost like assumed that there should just be like that there is just like one truth and one curriculum that every kid needs to learn. But I think the point you're making about ethnic studies is so true. And when you have something like AB 715, which is, I believe, sort of bringing in the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which essentially equates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, I mean, that's a major attack on academic freedom because, of course, there's obviously matters of interpretation in how people are going to approach this issue. I mean, I have my views about what's right and what's wrong, but, where's the academic freedom for teachers? I mean, if I'm a Palestinian teacher, it's sort of like if you're a Mexican-American teacher, as you are, I mean, there's a lot of things you can say about the quote-unquote Mexican-American war, but they're not all equally as true or as relevant. So it seems like there's also this issue of how do we bring this conversation about academic freedom and its relationship to liberation movements, its relationship to marginalized peoples and teachers themselves into the K through 12 classroom feels like a big, important conversation when we're talking about free speech here in 2025.
And when the framing of the discussion is like, we're going to take this bill that creates an entirely new position that removes the autonomy and authority of local school districts, and now it's at a state level controlled by one assigned person by the governor who's now going to oversee all these complaints. That is a very dangerous precedent. When we as a progressive movement, as a movement supporting ethnic studies, as a movement, I think broadly in California, we understand that, and we're trying to get ahead of a new society that is including the diversity of the different communities, multinational, multi-ethnic, that when you present this, it may be uncomfortable for some people to, that they don't want to accept that change. That discomfort as an educator means you have to have the opportunity to lean in a way, not on an academic level, not isolating that person, welcome them in, but also have a tough discussion that this is where we're moving towards as a society, which is why the state offers a general sense of a curriculum and goals. But what this does is it sidetracks all that. It determines that this is the right position. This is what you can and cannot say. And it's going to have major repercussions and again, built on the fact that I'm uncomfortable. If I'm uncomfortable, I can suddenly weaponize legally what that means. What if you're uncomfortable with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt? What if you're uncomfortable with, I'm in San Francisco with the LGBTQ flag? I mean, literally where we have, the great leader, Harvey Milk, who raised the issue of gay rights. And every time we're trying to progress in that realm, the issue of gender identity, like the fact that trans lives are being attacked. So you're telling me that now, if as an educator, I'm trying to raise the awareness of representing the full swath of people that I teach, that makes one person uncomfortable. Now they can go all the way to the state to get me punished as an educator. It's extremely dangerous because it's a snowball effect.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And it feels honestly in some ways like, we usually think about this in terms of auto emissions, that sort of California leads the nation. But I feel, I learned from your great president, Cassandra Curiel at UESF, that I think 1 in 8 students in the country are in the state of California. So it feels like, the history of California as a progressive state, the fact that, a huge number of our students are there, it's kind of a similar effect that this is almost like a laboratory, like, passing this bill and instituting this, then other states might feel more comfortable to say, well, hey, if they did it in California, why not try it in New York? Why not try it in Minnesota? Obviously, they probably have already think about it in Texas. But, it creates that sort of precedent effect that can move well beyond just one state.
100%. And, and in the times, again, supposedly, we have to remind everybody, California is a one-party state. It's run by the Democrat supermajority in the Assembly, in the Senate, in the state representative. Here, San Francisco, same. You'll never have a Republican run and win, because generally the idea is most people will consider themselves liberal, progressive, Democrats, right? But But when it comes down to it, what does that mean? And I think there are rank and file people in the voting base who really want to have that supposed assumed values lead to an actual program, an actual set of defined positions, political positions, like academic freedom, like freedom of expression. Even if, particularly for the issue of Palestine and the genocide being carried out by Israel, like you can't just have a position on some issues and be like it says progressive, but everything but Palestine, right? Like that just not how it works. We want to make sure, and if ethnic studies, the foundation of ethnic studies is the importance of solidarity among people, the common struggles, the common direction that as people fought for their rights, you led to a quote unquote more perfect, more democratic country. Like that's the narrative that's building, and all of a sudden we're in a time where both parties are actually attacking freedom of speech. One through the occupation by ICE in our cities, by the literal dismantling of the Department of Education, which was a project, right, brought in to equalize education. So you have on the right, you have that, but then on supposedly the Democratic Party side, you have this attack and chilling effect on the criticism of Israel, on genocide. And as an educator, again, we're told all the time that our practice must connect past experiences and past learnings and theories to the current experiences of students, what they're seeing live. And young people are being defined at the moment by what's going on in the world, by the wars, by the occupation, by the genocide, by the inequality. And for us to all of a sudden be removed of that context and not being able to increase the capacity of students to think critically, thinking it for quote unquote a globalized society. I think for the fourth largest economy in the world that is so close to Asia, right? I think it's a really ignorant and backward way of dealing with complicated issues in the world today.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a good point. And I mean, it brings me to another point, which is I think maybe just the way public education has become such a political football, and the issue of educating our students has, really gone down. And I think the connection between, sort of stifling the academic freedom of teachers and, which is going to speak to people who want to become teachers and whether or not they're going to be able to do what they would dream of doing in a classroom, which is also connected with their ability to survive. I mean, a recent report came out from the Economic Policy Institute and the Center for Economic and Policy Research about the teacher pay gap, which is a sort of stat a lot of people don't hear, but essentially about a 26% difference between what teachers get paid as opposed to every other college profession. Over the last decade, average teacher pay has gone down about $50 per week, while for other college graduate professions, it's gone up by about $220. And that's not to say that a lot of people aren't making it, but it brings me back to one of my favorite things I love to say, Frank. Whenever people get mad at CNN and MSNBC, I say, remember that every talking head you see on all these networks, Fox, all of them, make more money than any teacher in America. And it just says so much about, we claim we care so much about education, but so much of it is what you can't teach in terms of the truth. And then also that we don't want you to be able to survive on a teacher's salary. And then, we wonder why, people who I think would love to be in the classroom with kids are saying, I'm going to go to business school instead.
And I love that you're making the thing connection, because we as educators have to face that interconnectedness every single day. When you have, on top of the economic, and we'll get to that particular point, but on top of all these economic stresses, social stresses that lead to still 50% of the profession leaving after 7 years, right? Like that's a massive crisis that has not changed in decades. It got worse over COVID. It's somewhat stabilizing. But on top of that, then you have the attack on freedom of speech. Right. So it's an additional stress, as you said, people coming in. But the issue of pay, the fact that the unions, particularly in California, have been fighting so hard to coordinate their actions, to coordinate demands, to demand a higher standard of how much California is investing, right? Like we have the fact that we're still, even though fourth largest economy in California, we're still ranked somewhere between 25 and 30 in the nation. Right. We invest less than 3%, almost 3% of our budget, compared to something like Vermont, that's like 6% of the budget, which is still not a lot. But the fact that we're still so under resourced here somewhere in California, then you're telling people like, oh, come to the profession, go to the university, which is not free, and then come to very difficult working conditions. I think, and to add to that, in an environment where the current administration at a national, the president has threatened to take away money, to withhold funds, has threatened the children we serve, largely immigrant families, has threatened to even go after, again, the way educators are trying to teach. Like everything we teach is DEI, everything we teach is like anti their agenda, when you're just literally reflecting and trying to make sense of the realities that all politicians, that all leaderships have created for us. So it's a very chilling effect. I think there's a lot of educators who, especially like my generation, who came in very inspired in this profession from our leaders who had developed during the 70s and 80s. Right now there's a pushback so that the new educators, all they care about is math, reading scores, without the support, without the societal support, without the actual materials. It's your fault why these grades aren't. And we can get into the topic of AI, but you could see again the sort of the tech overlords, that tech money saying like, we can't do it, because, and not because of, again, the level of openings and the staff turnover, the crisis. No, that's not the problem. It's that we can now use AI to like teach kids, and we learned real fast in COVID the importance of having live education, educators, small classrooms, things that should not be measured by money. Again, this is ridiculous. As a social service, public institution, education is the one bedrock of public institutions left in this country. And I will tell you that educators will not go down fighting for that to be privatized, for that to be taken away for the future generations.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Well, hey, listen, there is a strong reason why in Reconstruction education was the biggest demand of the formerly enslaved peoples, and a lot to be said about that. Really appreciate you, as always, Frank Lara, educator, community organizer, and executive vice president of the United Educators of San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us here on The Freedom Side.